Okay, lovely. So thank you all very, very much for joining us this morning. I know staring at the screens is, you know, we're all moving from one thing to another, but it's all the same. So we're very grateful for you taking the time to join us for this conversation about community-led housing and affordable homes, or tackling affordability. And it's part of our festival of conversations that we've been having over the last couple of weeks, and we've had some really good interactions. Seen many of you at one or more events over the last couple of weeks. We've talked about housing with older people, and we've talked about building communities, not just homes. And these have been really important conversations in terms of getting people to think, just to challenge how we approach our thoughts about what's possible in our communities and what we get used to and what we'd like to challenge a little bit more. The question of affordability and the idea that people should be able to afford to live in a decent home is not new, and there are lots of different aspects to it. And I thought, to put today's conversation in some context, I would do a little bit of an exploration of the statistics, but I haven't prepared any slides, so I'm not going to bore you with graphs and charts. But I did just want to put things into a bit of context before we hear from Bill, who's very kindly come along to join us from Keswick, and tell us about his experience there and what his group have achieved over quite some years, and the journey from idea to homes on the ground and people in those homes. And it'll be really great to hear from Bill about the different opportunities that he and his group have pursued and hunted down and made possible. And you know, it's the art of perseverance almost as much as anything else. And Bill will tell us all about that. But I did want to put it into some context. So largely speaking about Cumbria, although our project remit does cover Lancaster City as well. But for the purposes of statistical sort of brevity, I've looked mostly at Cumbria. And the first thing to say, of course, is that from a sort of definitions point of view, affordable homes, affordable rent, is that which is 80% of market rent. That's the general understanding of what we mean when we say affordable. 80%, and 80% of something which is completely unachievable is still usually completely unachievable. So it often affordable homes, whether they're to rent or to buy in some way, are really just slightly cheaper than something which is unrealistically priced for most of us. Looking at things like the influence of having a national park in our area, or whether we see that as cause or effect, really, some of the issues that compound our house price issue include second home ownership. We've got really high rates of second home ownership in quite a lot of our communities. It's running at about, well, the statistics I found yesterday show it running at about 18% across the board. But some areas as high as 50+%, areas like Coniston particularly bad. And this is really detrimental to the fabric of the community. You know, it's difficult for a community to function with such high numbers of part-time occupancy. And it also skews the housing market, makes the housing market dysfunctional for many people who would choose to be here, choose to stay here if they could afford to. We have a high percentage of what you might call commuter homes and retirement homes, people choosing to live here because it's a nice place to be, creating hotspots of really high property value, and potentially commuting to places where the housing stock is less desirable. So it's a lovely place to live. We haven't quite got the work-life balance thing quite right across the board. Excuse me. I thought it's worth looking at a couple of examples and looking at the Cumbria Observatory. If people are interested in these statistics, by the way, I can summarise them on a paper which I can circulate later. But it is, again, just for context. Looking at one of the most challenging things about the housing stock, and this probably applies nationally, is the wild variety of pressures there are. So in Cumbria, I noticed that we have some areas, looking at places on the west coast, parts of Carlisle and Barrow, where we've got twice the national average of houses in Band A for council tax. That's the cheapest housing you can buy. Twice the national average of really low cost housing. And those houses are often only charged at about 30 to 40% of what a national average Band A house might cost. So we're talking about really seriously cheap housing. That presents one set of issues and one set of challenges. And at the other end of the scale, we've got Ullswater is the area that I picked yesterday to have a look at. Median house price quoted at £490,000. Looking at national average figures, that area has less than 25% of what would be expected in terms of small units, flats and small houses. So most of these properties are larger and more expensive. So very, very difficult market for a first-time buyer or somebody on a low income. Really twice the national average of Band G properties. So that's at the higher end of the property market. So again, I'm just trying to illustrate the breadth of the problem here. And then I had a look at Keswick, just because that's where Bill's going to be talking to us about. And statistically, Keswick's really interesting. It's sort of where we might expect it to be in Cumbria. But what I found interesting was that even the housing mix lends itself to different problems. It's got a high number of terraced houses, so it's quite the housing stock is quite fixed in that respect. And for the average terraced house, the figures that I was looking at suggest that a national price might be £189,000. In Cumbria, they would expect the average to be lower than that at about £114,000. And for Keswick, it would be £277,000. So that's actually about 30% higher than the national average price for a terraced house. Whilst that it isn't London prices, it's what I think we'll hear from Bill, and what I really wanted to highlight is that these prices are completely out of reach for the jobs market that these houses support. We've got quite a lot of part-time workers, a great deal of people working self-employed, and people working on seasonal wages. So I think Eden and Allerdale districts in the Northwest context come out as some of the lowest hourly rate payers that we can find. And this is because of the predominance of retail, hospitality, those sorts of industries where wages are low and precarious. And particularly in the climate that we find ourselves in now, with jobs being very vulnerable, people really are struggling to have the confidence to commit to housing, and anything we can do to open up this conversation and make sure that people are supported to find good housing, I think is really important. So apologies for the rambling start on statistics, but I just wanted to put it in that context. We've got a real issue here, but it isn't a simple issue, and it isn't simply a matter of saying there isn't a quick fix, but there are a number of ways through this, and there are a number of parts to this that we can try and challenge in different ways. Using a community-led approach to addressing a very local affordability issue is really powerful and very effective in some situations. Terrifically hard work, as many of you will know, but nonetheless, enormously powerful and impressive. And I do want to hand over to Bill now, who's got a few pictures that I'm going to share for him of what he's been up to. And Bill, would you like to introduce yourself while I set up the screen share?
Fran, can I just say I would quite like the numbers?
Sure. Okay.
And that would be helpful. I think, you know, as you know, we're trying to go for planning in the Ullswater area, but more generally, they're useful if you've got a summary. I mean,
Absolutely.
the observatory is good, but it's lengthy. So if you've got
it is. Yes.
short
Yes.
reviews,
Anybody looking for numbers, do go to the Cumbria Observatory website. It's very good. But as Judith says, it's enormous. So I'll try and pull out some highlights and share them. Okay, Bill, over to you. Let me just get the screen sorted.
So, Fran, can I just say first of all, my internet connection is sometimes saying it's unstable. So if folks, all right.
I seem to be having a problem too at the moment, so apologies for that. Let me try again. Am I still with you?
Yes.
Can you see the slide? I seem to have lost Zoom.
No, we can't.
Right, hold on a moment. Okay, apologies for this, people. What are you seeing at the moment?
Just a slide, just us.
You're seeing yourselves.
Okay. Yeah.
Apologies. My computer just did something rather strange. Let me try again.
Haha, there you go, slides.
Well, that's the second one. There we go.
There we go. We're at the beginning, I think, now. Is that okay? Apologies for that. There we go. Away you go, Bill. Thank you.
Right. That is the first slide, but that was the beginning of what I want to say. I was at an event yesterday and we were asked to explain how we got into affordable housing or dealing with the problem of lack of affordable houses. I said how I chaired a meeting organized by, well, a series of meetings. I chaired a series of meetings organized by churches together in Keswick. And at every single meeting, it came up about the lack of affordable houses in Keswick as being one of the major issues. And this was in 2009. And I'm still chairman of Keswick Community Housing Trust, but I'm happy to say we now have a vice chairman with the view that he will be chairman in the near future. So the journey goes on. But just to come back to Fran's introduction, affordability is a very varied standard. She's quite right about the 80%. That's taken by Homes England as the standard, but also, as Fran has suggested, 80% of an extremely high price is still quite a high price. The National Housing Federation, in my view, have a better definition of affordability, and they say that no family should spend more than 25% of their actual income, their net income, on housing. So that's, if you put that in Keswick terms, we just about come underneath the 25% of family income if you take what's called the lower quartile, and you can go onto the observatory, Cumbria Observatory, and get that figure. So it's roughly about 7,500. Sorry, it's roughly about 14,000 per person, and then that doubles up to 28,000. And if you take a quarter of that, it then becomes the 7,000 that I mentioned. So you shouldn't have to spend more than 7,000 a year on a house in Keswick, which of course is quite tricky to do. So we had these series of meetings and we identified the problem. We found out that you needed a family income of 70,000 a year to be able to afford an average house price in Keswick. And that was a problem. So, as I say, I was chairman of these meetings. I became chairman of a study group, and then I became chairman of Keswick Community Housing Trust. And that was established at the very end of 2010. We thought we'd cracked it at that stage, but of course there was much ahead of us. we had, because we had come from a church group, we went around all the local churches, and as you're probably aware, St. John's Church said that they had an idea of an extension to their graveyard, and the lower end of it was not really suitable for burial, and it might be suitable for houses, and of course it was. So we were very keen on this, but one of the doctors who was in the next door medical center had taken part in these first series of meetings, but we needed a little bit of land from the medical center, and we thought this would be no problem. But for this parcel of land that's no larger than, say, a van, a commercial van, they were going to charge 300,000. They then came down to 100,000. And after 9 months of negotiation, they were looking for 30,000 and we were considering 25,000. But we had other issues with that, so it didn't go ahead. And then the highways person changed, and the picture you see before you is of a road, and that road didn't need any land from the medical center. So we were able to go ahead, and that was in 2013. And we were able to design the houses. We got involved with the design. We were the developers, and that's my wife in the blue coat. And just above her is the architect. So everybody was involved. It was very collective. And you can see the houses behind you. So that was our first project. So I would certainly recommend that there is a possibility of church land in your area. Go and pursue it, but that's not the only way. I think it's very important that you have good relations with either your town council and more particularly with your borough council. The person just behind the bow that's cutting the tape is in fact the mayor of Keswick at that time. When we first talked to the town council, they were a little suspicious of an amateur group like us getting involved in the complex problem of housing. But as time went by, we built up a very close relationship with our town council, and we continue to. We now have a part-time manager, and I think we're into our 4th year now of the town council, our manager. Our second project came about because we had reasonable relations with Allerdale Borough Council, and our relations improved dramatically, partially through the build of the houses you see in front of you, but also the housing officer changed, and the new housing officer was very enthusiastic about what we were doing. And it was Graham Wilson, who organized for us to take over a disused toilet block. And we were able to convert this old building into 4 very nice flats, and that continues to this day. So Fran, if we could have the next photo, please. And there you are. That was a rather nasty building. We've put new windows in, painted it a bit, and done a lot of work inside, of course. So it's very important to liaise with your local authority, and you never know what will come of it. During or at the beginning of our first project, we were feeling nervous. We weren't very confident of what we were doing. So in order to hold our hands, we wanted advice from other housing associations. We didn't have ACT at that time involved in housing, and even the community Land Trust Network, which is CLH Network, is a very good and supportive organization. So we were advised our first project. Towards the end of that, their development manager approached me and said, would we be willing to come in to a much larger development, and they were a bit nervous taking on the whole development, and would we share it with them? And that became a 55 house development called Calvert Way. So could we have the next photograph? And there we go. So that's all the councillors there. They were very keen to be shown around. They're all Allerdale, what was developing at that stage. It wasn't finished, but you can see some of the houses there, similar to the first design, but they're all either 3 or 2 bedrooms. Our capacity, the floor area is for the 3 bedrooms is 85, and for the 2 bedrooms it's 70. So they're not small houses. On the continent, a 3-bedroom house should be 100 square meters, but you know, they're not pokey little houses, and everybody who moves in is very pleased with the size. So that was quite complex, developing Calvert Way, because in some ways it was easier because we didn't actually develop the site ourselves, so we had less risk. But on the other hand, you're dependent on the developer doing all that he should, or they should. And unfortunately, they were a little bit behind getting the roads adopted, and also the rainwater runoff and other boundary issues sorted out. And believe it or not, 3.5 years later, it's still not finalized, which is causing us a bit of a problem. So that's the downside, but the lack of risk by buying a house from a developer is certainly not to be underestimated. Right from the beginning, we were talking to other churches, and one of the churches we were talking to was the Methodist Church, and then the church hall and other buildings at the back of their church would no longer be required. So perhaps we could have the next photograph.
Bill, I wonder if I can interrupt you for a moment and
Yes.
just, we're having a little trouble hearing you from time to time. It might be better if you switched your video feed off and we could just hear your voice while you're speaking. That it might take some pressure off the broadband.
Good idea. Let's try that.
Thank you. See how we go.
Yeah. So, but everybody can see that photograph, I take it? Yeah. So, just to the right of that photograph is the Methodist Church, but which is now being developed. It's multiple, and they didn't need the kitchen and other things, which was a very eclectic mix of buildings, some really fascinating and others in very poor condition. So unfortunately, we haven't finished yet, but you can get the idea of what it will look like when it's finished. The rendering has still to be completed. It's only the first stage, and we're not intending to have bits of plastic for the drain pipes, so that will be changed before it's finished. But it gives you a very good idea of what you can do with quite a small space. So the houses on the right are 3-bedroom, and the one with the nice stone is a 2-bedroom one, and that stone is recovered from the demolition of the church hall. And we feel that it's very important that people who live in affordable housing should be proud of their housing and contribute to the well-being of their community. And I think good design is very important to support that sort of whole ethos. Now, I'm not sure whether you want me to say a little bit about pitfalls we've come across, the difficulties and how we got around them. And Fran mentioned perseverance, and that certainly is one of the things that you need. But
I think Bill, if there are specific points that you want to mention, that specific humps in the road that you had to deal with, it might be useful to hear about them now, but I'm sure many things will come up in conversation afterwards.
Right.
So give us a flavour, that would be great.
Yeah, so I mentioned about the difficulty with the doctors, and stayed us for nearly 10 months, amazingly, that negotiation over this small parcel of land. And then happily in the end, we didn't need that. So that is just a lesson of purely and simply persevering, negotiating, and maybe looking for a different solution. And we found the different solution. And it just didn't happen by accident. We arranged a meeting with the new highways officer with an idea to persuade them to have a different view. But we organized a meeting, we briefed our architect and what have you to say, what our views were and so on and so forth. So that was successful. The Methodist Church now was possibly going to be our first project, but they had difficulty their side, and so that lingered on. Then we had legal difficulties. We tried to get an option agreement. And at this stage, I think I'll just summarize by saying trustees of churches are probably the most inflexible people to deal with. They have a huge responsibility of doing the right thing. And unfortunately, that responsibility tends to block out their mission. All churches have a mission to help their community, and they just need reminding about that from time to time. But eventually, we're getting, it'll be wonderful when it's finished. Now, I don't know how many of you know me, but I'm an enthusiast about providing affordable homes. And if I was to do it on my own, I would fail totally. So in an organization, you need the people with vision, but you also need the people to, oh, hold on a minute, are you sure you're right on that? So the people who will question within your group, you need it within your group. Also, you obviously need advisors. We were total amateurs when we started off. We now have a lot of experience in providing different types of housing. As I said, our first project, we were the developers. Our second one was a renovation. Our third one, we were buying houses from a developer. And our fourth one, we demolished a building and then put up new buildings. So we've had a range. So we have gained experience that way. But I think groups should never be worried about taking advice and then disagreeing with it if they feel that is the right thing. Just because an architect or a quantity surveyor has said a certain thing, you don't have to follow that advice. You must take it into consideration and then form your own view. And then lastly, I think I would just underline the perseverance. You do have to keep going, but it's very rewarding when you get there at the end. There's no better feeling than seeing, well, that photograph in front of you now and providing it. And then Fran, if we could just finish on the last photograph. And the reason we do it is this, though that family there, I met at the church fete the year before we completed those houses. And they told me that they really wanted to have a house there because they could see them going up. The next year, then they were able to look over and say, that's our house, we got it. And they got it because we have a very rigorous allocation policy and everything else. And it's just wonderful to know that's why you're doing it. You're providing homes for people who live in the community and work in the community. Thanks, Fran.
Brilliant, Bill. Thank you very much indeed. I'm just going to remove that cheerful picture so we can see each other again. that was wonderful. Thank you very, very much for all of that, and for sharing your experience and your obvious passion for what you do. I think it's amazing that your group has done 4 different developments in 4 different ways, and it really is a testament to your perseverance and your willingness to try anything to solve the problem that you've identified. It's extraordinary and very commendable. So thank you very much indeed. Just to pull out a few things that I think we're all likely to be thinking about as a result of what you've said. Opportunities for land are clearly an interesting starting point for many groups and communities. Talking to the church and talking to the local authorities about opportunities that they're aware of are 2 good starting points, really good starting points. I'm interested to hear from Bill, actually, his advice on how we approach the church, or the best route into that conversation. That might be interesting to hear. But just really like to open the conversation up now and make sure that people have the chance to talk about what they're doing, share their experience of learning and thinking about affordability where they are, and ask Bill about his own experience, and hopefully we can fill in a few gaps. I don't know I think the chat so far has not been questions, but I may be wrong. Apologies, I'm just checking. Does anybody have any direct questions for Bill immediately?
Fran,
Sorry, Judith. Hello,
Judith. Sorry, so for everybody else, I'm from Glenridding, Patterdale. I mean, I'm interested not just in Bill's experience, which is obviously very extensive, but about the measurement of need and the real demand for appearing, as it were, when a development's been completed. I mean, we've had 3 housing needs surveys in the last 15 years. We do have a confidential list of applicants, which is I don't know about, but it's big. We don't know how reliable the need is. In principle, Bill, how did you find measuring need and type of dwelling worked best?
Well, I spoke to the National Park on this shortly after our first project, and there are housing needs survey, but in my view, the real figure is the applications you get for your houses. So exactly. For our first project, we had both shared owned and rental, and we did them separately. So we had 10 houses in total for affordable rent and shared owned, so 5 of each. So for the 5 houses, in each occasion, we had more than 20 applications. So that was our first project. And since then, we have had a demand of more than 5 to 1. For Calvert Way, we built some 4 bedrooms. We built 4 4-bedrooms, 4 2-bedrooms, and 11 3-bedroom ones, or 10 3-bedroom ones. And the demand for 2-bedroom ones was the highest, then 3, much the same, but slightly less, and very little demand for 4-bedroom ones. So if we're doing another project, we probably won't build 4-bedroom, or very few anyway.
But Bill, one of the things that we're interested in is convincing the community that there is a need before the development starts. And I think that's quite important. So what you're saying is the development, when completed, people rushed forward. It was the before stuff I was slightly wanting to know a bit more about.
Well, you will have the housing needs survey, but
we do. It's 2 years out of date.
Yes, but it's a very good indicator. But the real way of liaising with the community, and I didn't mention it, is by having public meetings. Not too many, sure, but maybe 6 monthly or something like that, but talking to the community.
Totally agree. How would you do it during COVID?
Yes.
Well,
that's our issue.
I have taken part in quite a lot.
It's tricky, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yes, yes.
That's
But
all.
I
Fine,
think,
thanks.
you know, it's a long journey time. Things may be slightly different.
Absolutely. Let's hope.
No, I think that's a really, really useful question, Judith. We encourage communities to try and understand their housing need so that it can inform what they do. And yes, I think Bill's experience is not unusual, that once you get to the point where you've got bricks and mortar established, the need is slightly different. And that's, you know, it is a feature of this conversation. But I guess maybe that lends us our thinking to be a bit more, well, I don't know, just wondering if there are opportunities to think about the reuse of existing housing stock as a swifter solution, a more an opportunity for more swift reaction to immediate need. But yeah, I think the idea that housing need can be pinned down precisely as a scientific certainty is not the case. Lorraine.
Hi there, Lorraine Wall, Friends of the Lake District. I was just interested in that discussion really because obviously there's a difference between genuine need and then what Bill mentioned, the word demand as well. I just wondered where he also mentioned a very particularly robust allocation policy that they have, and I wondered if you could just explain what that is and how different it is, if it is different to the usual allocation policies that local councils have, for example. Just obviously if a lot of people rush forward for a new development, which they all look really great and lots of people would love to live in them, but obviously need is different from simply demand. You know, lots of people might like to live in a nice brand new house that's solar panels on the roof and so on, but how are they going to, how does that allocation policy differentiate between those that genuinely do need those new houses and people who might just have applied because they'd quite like one and they'll see how they get on, sort of thing?
Yes, to progress through our allocation process, you have to pass a number of stages. So the first one is that you can afford what you're applying for. And the second and possibly more important one is that you cannot afford a house on the open market, and you have to prove that. And local knowledge is extremely useful. We had an application on one of our projects, and we asked on the application form, do you or any of your family own another property? And the answer on the application form was no. And yet half of Keswick knew that he had a holiday home in Spain. So that one didn't get through. So it's quite difficult because people are not always honest, even though we say on our application form that misleading information is likely to lead to refusal. And we have that, you know, right at the beginning, and people still might slightly twist what they say. But that's basically how we filter that, you know, how you qualify, to make sure that they can prove that they can't afford a house on the open market and that they can afford what they're applying. And we don't mind whether you know, benefits are taken into consideration. That doesn't come into it. It's total income. And then we also
sorry, go John.
We also give a lot of priority. We give a lot of priority to the percentage of your life you've lived in Keswick. Do you have family connections with Keswick, with the Keswick community? You know, football teams, even, you know, anything, and that will help the person qualify.
Thanks, Bill. John, did you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, I've just got a comment and then a question, really. I think that's
sorry, John, can you tell us where you're calling from?
Yeah, sorry, from Sheffield. I've got a slightly different take on this because I'm trying to set up a non-profit company in Sheffield building affordable homes, which is proving incredibly difficult. But yeah, one of the problems that you've identified there is kind of the of affordable housing, and it makes it quite a sensitive issue. When just putting that label on it to start with, I've found that's a problem in what we've been trying to do. So yeah, but very interested in what you're doing up there, Bill. Amazing work. The fact that you've actually got houses on the ground in such a short space of time is absolutely incredible and very inspiring, I think. Have you found in your work with the councils up there that there's any willingness to come in as partners with land, with Section 106 and community infrastructure levy money? Thinking particularly, you just had this mine being landed on you. If there's going to be a possibility of some positive community development coming out of that, is it being done at a sort of regional level, or is it all local liaison with town councils at the moment?
The mine issue is quite live at the moment, but most people in Cumbria, I think, will value its employment opportunity. The strong argument that makes sense to many Cumbrians is that we're importing coking coal anyway, so there is not a lot of opposition in Cumbria to it. Obviously, the Green Party would disagree with me, but I'm just giving you a general view of it. As regards employment in Keswick is possibly, I don't know what the figure is, but it's probably about 98%. We don't have an unemployment problem, but we have a low salary problem, because most people, as was said previously, Fran mentioned it, are in the hospitality or retail sectors. That's our problem. But, and you're also quite right about the conception of what an affordable house would be. One of the problems that the medical centre next door had with us is that they didn't want a slum next to a medical centre. Well, our houses are not a slum. And if you talk to your residents, and which we have done in all our developments, you know, they have pride in their development, they pride in their community. It just works, you know.
Yeah, and that comes from good design work and negotiating with the people who are going to be living there to design the communities they want to live in, I guess, as well. But anyway, thank you. Very, very, very inspiring.
I think the other thing, John, with regard to the question of perception is stating the obvious for a moment. The idea of community-led does change people's views of who is benefiting from this. And we had a conversation last week about, which included a discussion about the nuances of local housing allocations policy and so on, and the fact that historically there has been a problem of people being dropped into communities which, and in an unhelpful way. This is something that people tend to have clung on to for 20 years, and they worry a lot about having people foisted on them from far and wide, you know, problem tenants from other pet areas being moved around. And whilst anecdotally there are, you know, people still talk about this, actually the policies are cleverer, and they are cleverer still if they are community designed, because they respond to what the local community are trying to achieve, and they've got the interests of local people at their heart. So actually people's perceptions can be shifted quite a lot if the conversation is open and frank about who's going to benefit from this. That's just an observation.
Yes,
I understand
agree,
your
absolutely.
comment.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree with that.
Yeah. Anyone else got any questions for Bill at the moment? Oh, there goes Damien. Okay.
What's the next project, Bill?
We have two possible ones, but obviously please keep it confidential. There is a possibility of an extension to Calvert Way. I mentioned the issues over the drainage, but the second phase will not obviously go ahead until all that is sorted out. So that's one possibility. And the other possibility is it's very important to send Christmas cards. I'll explain. We were approached by a local Catholic priest who was at a nearby youth centre where people come for the weekend or even for weeks, and they develop them while they're there. And he had a suggestion that we possibly purchase some land from him. But when it went to the Bishop of Lancaster and Cumbria's trustees, they didn't want to talk to him. Now, I happen to know Paul Swarbrick, the Bishop of Lancaster, so I was trying to send emails and various things, but I think his people diverted my inquiries. But anyway, Bishop Paul sent me a Christmas card, so I sent him one. Great to talk about affordable housing in Keswick. And lo and behold, he rang me up the other day. So we'll have to wait and see.
Very good. Thank you, Bill.
But I think maybe my voice went then, but it's so important to talk to people and keep them on side, whether that's bishops or local clergymen or landowners or whatever. It's and councillors, of course. Anybody who you think may help in delivering houses.
Yeah. Damien, did you have something else to ask?
It was just one for Bill. Bill, it was about the toilet block in Keswick when you got it off Allerdale. When you did this sort of did you do a feasibility study then with the architect and the builder to sort of work out how that would divide into 4 flats and things around sort of, I think I read some stuff about sort of energy efficiency measures and stuff. Was that all part, did you do a feasibility study first once you secured it? Just want to check.
Well, at the beginning, I asked Graham, did he want to do it collaboratively, but he was very clear that this was to be a community project. So we listened to that. We were going to do 2 2-bedroom units and 1 single-bedroom unit, and they asked, could they be 4 1-bed units, which is what we did. So I won't say they specified 4 flats, but they did ask us to consider it. And as they were gifting it to us, we went along with them. But then, yes, it is actually amazingly efficient. We were able to build that in, and all of the flat roof virtually has got photovoltaics on it. The insulation we were able to get in an old building, I was personally very surprised that you can retrofit insulation quite successfully.
This is a really nice example of reclaiming what would otherwise be a wasted building, and I think that people are right to question the difficulties and the perceived costs of making older buildings or disused buildings habitable. But there's a lot of sense in exploring all of those options and making best use of buildings which are already in place. And again, hats off to Bill for spotting the opportunity and having that conversation, or being in the right place to be offered the opportunity. That's the other thing, is once you start conversations about your own scope of imagination, I think people come to you with opportunities that you might not otherwise have spotted, which is also terrific. Lorraine.
Yeah, that was just to follow on really from that point, Fran. That I just think it's great that you're looking as eagerly at brownfield sites and existing buildings as you are at greenfield sites on that are often on the edge of town, because as someone said in the comments, even though it perhaps is a bit more expensive, there might be a few more hurdles. There's the whole climate change argument that they are more using that embedded carbon rather than releasing it and losing it. But there's also lots of community benefits to developing sites that are actually within towns and that were previously perhaps community or other buildings as well. You know, it helps to bring vitality back to the town and to keep people in the community where they won't have to drive to get into facilities and services, which sites that are greenfield, which are often on the edge of towns, don't necessarily have those benefits. So I think that it's really, really great to see that you are looking at that range of different options for providing new housing, rather than just, you know, plonking large numbers of houses on the edge of settlements where people are distant from the town centre and don't necessarily integrate as well into the community. Or that is just really that comment. Thanks.
Thank you, Lorraine. No, I think that's absolutely right. We're all quite conscious of the real sense of making best use of existing housing stock before we continue to build. But the pressure there are a number of sort of political things in play at the moment where the pressure to build is quite high. The opportunities to build are trying, there's a lot of pressure to create those opportunities for new build, and also a huge amount of pressure to move the market towards home ownership, further towards home ownership options, rather than supporting affordable rent, which I think is going to create a long-term set of other problems for us. But that's another conversation. Helen, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. Yes, sorry. No, I would like to echo that, what Lorraine just said. We have a WhatsApp group for councillors, and they're just saying that the County Council Planning Group is getting a lot of flack about building on greenfield sites. And they've also had, as a district councillor and a town councillor, I've had people telling me, we should be reusing buildings and revitalising our town centres as well. So I wholly agree with that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Useful to hear. Judith, did you want to add something?
Well, I wanted actually to raise a bit more on affordability, if that's okay.
Fine.
Because I think one of the big problems, certainly in the more rural parts, is that there is a constant seepage of owner-occupied property, particularly on death, when families quite reasonably want the money and split it. So there's a whole issue about that. So there's a constant seepage of, as it were, in village properties. We've got several areas where whole rows of miners' houses, and Coniston has the same, have gone for that reason. It's not anything sinister, it's just what's going to happen. And it will continue to happen, won't it, when 2 or 3 kids inherit one dwelling. So although I totally agree that having existing buildings is good, it's quite tricky, because for some members of the community, often very long established families, that's their asset.
Yeah.
So we do have to, and I know Lorraine, as in planning Lorraine, not Lorraine, well, both Lorraines probably, will take the point about open land. I mean, I agree with that, but it's quite difficult in a lot of the villages to find areas where you can develop in the village. And that's, I'm not saying, because I think Glenreading and Patterdale are quite well off for that in some ways, but lots of places really struggle with that. I mean, Above Derwent had real challenges with trying to find sites. And I do think they're not alone, Langdale. So it's about the balance, isn't it? What does the community and indeed the local authorities want in terms of numbers, living, proportions? I'm really keen, I know this will never happen, on having a percentage of, no more than 25% owned by people outside the area, but that's very tricky. I do understand that politically, but it's kind of thinking in that way. And then the affordability issue becomes, I do want to say a bit on affordability. We're finding that Homes England and the local authorities do have money at the moment. They may not have the right money for the right projects, but they do appear to have money for feasibility studies. And I think that's quite a positive change in the world of trying to get funding for these schemes. I don't know whether Bill or others want to comment on that.
Yes, and just this week, indeed, the fund has been increased for this type of thing, for feasibility studies and the like. Very important to get your facts when you're trying to either influence potential lenders, people who, of course, will have to give you planning permission and the like. A feasibility study is a very useful thing and should not cost anything. The Homes England should be able to help you, or maybe your local authority. Yeah, good point.
Thanks, Judith. I think you do raise some really useful and interesting and challenging points. You know, the point about things being owned privately just immediately takes them outside the scope of a community conversation in many, many ways. But maybe there are routes forward with communities who've already established that they're interested in any opportunity which would arise, and maybe people can think of creative ways of joining together and pooling resources to keep those properties within the benefit of the community as they reach market. The difficulty will be that they will be at full market price, and it may be that they can be outbid by somebody else, or it becomes unrealistic. It supports a broken market already, doesn't it? So it's a bit problematic. But yes, a useful point to raise. Thank you. Lorraine's put in the chat comment about working with planners to make sure that we're keeping on track with our thoughts, and they do, you know, their understanding of the possible sometimes needs wheedling out of them, but they're, you know, it's important conversations to have early on. I think I saw Katie waving earlier. Did you want to chip in, Katie?
Yes, it was a question for Bill. Just in a kind of alternate universe, if, and I know it doesn't work like this, obviously, but if you had a choice and you could choose between those 4 routes that you've taken, and based on experience, is there any one that stands out as, I guess, least stressful, maybe, or least barriers, or are they all just so different that you couldn't really choose one?
I think most of our group would prefer the first option, where we're in control of things, where you are the developer. But you know, there's swings and roundabouts. There are advantages in just buying a house from a developer. I have a slight preference to the first one myself, but I'm quite prepared to work with any of those 4 vehicles of providing affordable housing. If that's the only thing available to you, all 4 work. I've got to say, none of them are stressless. They're all stressful. But if you can share things, it's amazing how strong you become.
Okay, thank you.
Bill, I just wonder if you can answer a question for me, which I was sort of half articulated earlier. If people are interested in talking to the church as a body, but they don't know how to, they don't have an in because they're not part of that conversation naturally, what would be the best route to do that?
I would say 2 things. First of all, go to your local minister, because if you have your local minister on your side, that is a tremendous help when dealing with not so much the hierarchy, they're very sympathetic, but the people with the responsibility of managing the church properties. And remember, they're suffering very much at the moment due to COVID. COVID has had a really serious detrimental effect, particularly on the Church of England, but also other churches as well. I would certainly recommend that. But also, I serve on various committees within Churches Together in Cumbria, and I'm more than willing to be a vehicle for any inquiry.
That's very generous offer.
We're endeavouring at the moment to try and alert trustees that maybe now is the time to look at church property and be radical in how they look at it. What the Methodist Church has done here in Keswick, I think could work in many other places. So in other words, they've improved their church to make it multifunctional, and then maybe other properties that are attached to the church have been used for affordable housing. That's exactly what we have done. And I think that may work in these quite difficult times post-COVID.
Thank you for that. That's really helpful and generous as always, but useful to know that the local route is, you know, should always be the first port of call, because I think it's well, it's just helpful to understand the context, really. I think Lorraine Smythe maybe wanted to ask a question of Bill. Put you on the spot there.
Hi,
Lorraine.
Bill. You won't be surprised by this question, Bill. I wanted to ask about registered provider status.
I was wondering when that would come up.
Sorry. Maybe it's worth to explain that you are a registered provider and what that process does for you with your relationship with Homes England.
Well, we've been very fortunate. We've had an excellent relationship with Homes England. We've gone through 3 representatives over our 10 years, and all of them have been very supportive. When we applied to be a registered provider, it was apparently a lot simpler. But if anybody from ACT is listening, it would be wonderful if ACT would become a registered provider for small communities in Cumbria. But there you go.
I'm still trying, Bill.
Yeah. I hate red tape. I'm surrounded by red tape and I absolutely hate it. Why you can't just spit on your hand, shake and get the deal done, I don't know, but that's not how things work. You just have to suck it up and go through the red tape and I'm a registered provider because there is money there. Homes England are very, very keen to lend to communities. They really are. They've possibly got a more preference to communities than to urban developments, amazingly.
Thank you, Bill. Just for those of you who may not have understood the context of that question, elsewhere in the country, some of the community-led housing hubs are exploring the option of becoming registered providers simply to help their local communities access Homes England funding. Essentially, it's because for communities to speak to Homes England direct and to benefit from Homes England programmes directly, they need to be either on the registered provider list or working through an existing registered provider. So we've been encouraging communities to talk to the likes of Eden Housing and South Lakes Housing and Castles and Coasts and the other players who have expressed any interest at all in local conversations. And some of the big players just aren't interested, but many of those with historical local roots are open to the conversation and are good partners. But the partnership does come at some expense to the local community. In some cases, it means they have to compromise quite a lot on their objects. And we had an interesting conversation last night about what the red lines for a community might be. And it's worth being really clear when setting out your vision for what problem you're trying to achieve and how you want to achieve it, what it is that you're prepared to compromise on and what you're really uncomfortable compromising on. Sometimes you'll find that, well, sometimes we have found that working with a registered provider means that they come with their own red lines and that the two things are immovable. So Bill's solution, which admittedly came about some years ago, and Homes England has moved on since then. Bill's solution in Keswick was that they themselves would become the registered provider and manage their own affairs in a way which satisfies the regulator of social housing. So this means that they're operating at a very high standard with good administrative backup. And that obviously has its own implications for staffing and time. But all of that said, there are several ways to get from A to B on this conversation. And Bill's story is one which comes from, as we've seen, you know, a variety of experiences. The fact that the Keswick group are a registered provider and have been for some time means that their understanding of what Homes England want has grown over time. Whereas if you're stepping into it now as a new community group, I think it might be quite challenging. And certainly the conversations that we've had locally suggest that it's not worth doing if you're thinking you're only going to do this once. But if, like Bill, you're always on the lookout for the next opportunity, I think there are good reasons to keep considering it. It certainly keeps the door open to future opportunities. Not to say that working in partnership with a good local housing association wouldn't. Just Bill, on that point, I wonder if you can explain to people how you have picked up the bits that people shy away from rather in managing the housing and the tenancies and so on. Do you now, and at what point did you decide to take on the responsibilities for maintenance or allocations, those sorts of things, which people find a little bit potentially embarrassing to do locally? There may be others on the call who've got things to say on that.
Within our group of 10 or 12 people initially, there was at least 3 or 4 people who others might describe as control freaks. There was certainly a strong element of controlling your own. We had seen allocations go wrong with certain developments here in Keswick. People were allocated houses inappropriately. In one occasion, somebody was allocated to a house who had 2 holiday homes. So we were very determined that we would do it ourselves. There was never a question that we would ask Impact to do it. They helped us with it, and they helped us design our allocation policy, but it was our policy, and we were very determined on that. As regards the management for the first, I think, year and a half, maybe 2 years, when we only had one project, we only had 10 houses, 5 of which were rented. 3 of the board did it between us. There was 3 of us did it between us. But I've got to say, we're really happy with our part-time manager. She's now become part of the board. She lives in one of our houses in Calvert Way. It's working out extremely well. We get a high level of satisfaction from our residents. We use local skilled plumbers and electricians and so on. It works extremely well.
Brilliant, thank you. I've just got another question, just keeping in mind the affordability angle on the conversation. And I apologise if you said this while you were speaking earlier and I missed it. We were talking about the 80% definition, and yesterday there was some discussion about whether Homes England or local authorities or other partners have a particularly strong view that we should be looking at achieving that 80% target. It's not quite the right word, but whether setting a lower rent is something that you have chosen to do and have been supported to do by your partners and funders. Sorry, Bill, if you did say that earlier, I apologise, but I'm just interested to know how you set your rent.
We actually set our rent on each scheme as to what income we need in order to cover the indebtedness on that site. So we have just taken a figure. It was our treasurer's figure that he says he plucked out of the sky, but in fact, on what other lenders do, they express it slightly differently. But we make sure that no more than 75% of the repayment is taken out of the rental income. So the way Unity Trust Bank is that they put it the other way around, and they say the rents must be at least 125% of the repayments. So we just worked it out on that. So we got a grant to do the work, and when it's all finished and all the bills are paid, we then have to repay a long-term loan, a usually 20-year loan. can be 25 if you're fortunate, but something like that. So based on the repayments of that loan, we set our rents. But of course, we now have, or we will very shortly have, 4 different types of rent. And there is a suggestion by some within the group that we unify our rents. I'm not mad keen on that because the houses are all slightly different. They're in slightly different places and so on. But that's how we do it anyway, currently. It's just purely based on a financial way of what, in order to cover the repayments in a sensible way, and to leave 25% of that rent to go towards long-term improvements and maintenance.
That's really helpful, really helpful. Thank you. And of course, it makes perfect sense in the context of just, you know, being a community group able to cover costs and then maintain, well, have a maintenance budget essentially, or have an ongoing fund.
Yeah.
The long-term planning is all important, and your only source of income, grants aside, will be the rent. So that's where your repayments are all coming from. So yes. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Thank you.
And can I just come in about the 80%? Because I think there is a real complexity here. Because wages across Cumbria are so varied, with this extraordinary dominance of the Sellafield rates, which are good to very good, and the difficulties within particularly the tourism sector, and which will be possibly more difficult, who knows how that will pan out. I do think this is a local authority point, so probably directed at some people who are on this call. There is an issue about where the 80% rent boundaries are drawn. I mean, Eden, where I am, has quite a high income compared to some parts of Cumbria, but parts of Eden don't. And that is a really tricky definition point, which is not really for people watching this, but I do think it's something that ACT might perhaps consider looking into, because if we were in Bootle, 80% of what is an affordable rent would be affordable for many people.
Yeah.
If you're in Kendal, it probably isn't. And that's the difficulty that all of us, I think, and others may want to come in, face. I mean, that's part of the, how do you draw a community? How do you draw the boundaries? And the formality of the present system doesn't help what some of us are trying to do.
No, I think that's a really good point, Judith. Thank you. The arbitrariness of lines on a map, district boundaries, is often unhelpful. I know, you know, the same applies for community benefit coming from 106 agreements and that sort of thing. It's difficult to see the logic behind the decision making sometimes. Interesting challenge that you might want us to take forward. Thank you for that. I'll add it to the list. I think you're absolutely right. And again, you know, just rummaging through the statistics, it's actually quite difficult to find the true story sometimes, because numbers can be so easily skewed by a dominant industry or interest. So it's a really good point, Judith. Thank you. Okay, we're coming into our last 15 minutes, and I'm conscious that I will finish on time. So if anybody's got any more points or questions, or wants to soapbox for a minute, please feel free. We don't often have this opportunity. So anybody wanting to bring up any new queries at this point? Oh, Katie.
Forgive me if you said this, Bill, how many people have you got on your committee, and has that waxed and waned during the developments that you've done?
That's a very good question. Because I possibly overworked the initial group when we were completing Banks Court and developing Calvert Way, not quite at the same time, but very close together. About 3 years ago, there was certainly a number of people in our group were saying to me, slow down, Bill, we can't do another one. And there was certainly a weakening of the strength of the group, shall we say. but we were very fortunate. We have a very good local paper, and we put an article in the local paper, and it produced a wonderful influx of new blood. So our original group was 10 strong. That had possibly weakened to about 8. But now, we're at least 16, maybe more in our group, of which even maybe up to half of them would be new members and very keen to carry on the work that we've been able to do over the last 10 years.
That's a good critical mass of numbers, I presume, that kind of number.
Yeah. And we will shortly have 41 properties.
Not bad. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you very much. Okay, I just sort of drawing together my thoughts about what I've been given to think about here, and the things that are sort of leaping off the page for me are about a flexibility of approach, which is always going to be important. I think this is something that's just, you know, been banging me over the head for the last fortnight, really, is you can't approach this with too much clarity, apart from possibly what you're trying to achieve. And if you hold true to what you're trying to achieve, and really remain open-minded about the tools you need to get there, I think that's probably the best advice I'm picking up at the moment, that there are lots of ways to get there, none of them particularly easy, unfortunately. I think a really interesting point made about need versus demand, and how we establish the one from the other and make sure that we're focusing on local need and local possibility, really, in some senses. Having a really honest conversation with potential partners, and not being afraid to ask questions and stick your neck out a bit. I think that's also something that's come forward. Just making yourself available to the opportunities. It sounds really, really important to me. You know, take almost personally Judith's challenge to explore the idea of district boundaries and the understanding of wage discrepancies, because that's such an important issue in terms of planning policy and in terms of people's general understanding of what's going on in an area. We come across this a lot. You know, ACT faces a rural community challenge all the time, with policies being written sometimes in an urban setting where they misunderstand what's required, and they sometimes do damage as a consequence unwittingly. And I think sometimes we want a nice simple set of numbers or a boundary that will help us to achieve something, and it's actually unhelpful in the end. So I think that's a really interesting point, and if we can get somewhere where there's a bit more nuance in the way we describe averages, it would be quite interesting. I'll certainly do a quick summary of the information that I was talking about at the beginning, so that people can see some of the statistics, and I'll include a link to where things have come from, so people can drill down into them a bit more if they want to. And as always, myself and Lorraine and Katie and Damien actually are all here to help. It's really great to have these conversations going on. I'm enormously grateful to Bill. Thank you very much indeed for your time this morning, and for, you know, your candor in answering all these questions so helpfully. You know, appreciate your support in a number of ways, but thank you very much for coming along today and answering people's questions so helpfully. I'm thinking that we're drifting towards the end of this session. If people are happy to leave it there. If anybody's got any last minute questions, you're very welcome. We've still got a few minutes left. Oh, Lorraine's at it again.
Yeah, me again. Just, it's not a question, it's just something that might be of interest to people if you weren't already aware. It has recently closed, but the government have just done a consultation on revisions to the permitted development rights, and they are planning to open up a new range of options for people to create new houses out of particular uses that previously would have required planning permissions to make that change from use A to a housing use. So it's just worth bearing in mind that there might be some more flexibility there. depending on what the outcomes of that consultation end up being. But I think that is the government's intention to make those changes a bit easier through removing the need for planning applications.
Thank you, Lorraine. I have not done a very good job on plugging government consultations, but there's a lot going on in the planning context at the moment, and obviously the government is doing everything it can to kind of loosen things up and make it easy for people to do things quite quickly. I think there needs to be some caution around that, but I think it's, you know, certainly it will create opportunities, and good to be reminded of that. Thank you.
Fran, can I just ask that you emphasise?
Oh, we've lost you, Bill. What do you want me to emphasise?
Affordability. That it should,
sorry, say again.
That standard on affordability of your income. I'll message you.
Thank you. That would be helpful. I'm really sorry. We've just missed you at the crucial moment there. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to end the call. So many thanks to all of you for coming. Particular thanks to Bill, and really nice to see you all. Okay, do please keep in touch. Thanks.